Okay, welcome, Jenny, to the Lola Community Podcast. And I invited you to come on to speak today and give us some information about EFT and tapping. But then I also know that kind of moving beyond tapping, that you have been doing more past life work.
Yes.
And so I'd love to talk about the progression a little bit and sort of where you are, how that journey really happened for you.
Exactly. Well, I guess as most people, when they have a big shift in their life, it's usually from some sort of trauma or tragedy, or, you know, the dark soul of the night sort of thing. And I had that when my mother died suddenly when I was about 31 or 32. I had 3 young children. And after that, I'd always been, I'd grown up going to Sunday school and church, and I started to delve into my spirituality and what were near-death experiences and what was, what happened after you died. And I was gifted a session with a clairvoyant, and my sister had her birthday on the day Mum's celebration of life was, and she'd been told lots of things that came directly from my mum. And so I knew that there was life after death and that there was this communication. I'd also done, I was also having trouble with the marriage, and my marriage broke up soon after. And it was after that, like I'd been with my ex-husband since I was 15. So it was like he was part of my identity growing up as who I was. And for that to then disappear with 3 small children, no mum, it was like, what's going on here? What's life all about? Why am I here? And it was in that time period, a couple of months after my marriage broke up, that I met this guy. And it was an instant connection. He was 10 years younger than me, and we ended up talking about all things spiritual and what was this connection. And then we did past life regressions together. And what happened was I went back to my last past life, which was in the American Civil War. And I remember, I can still see this beautiful white plantation home. And my father was a colonel of some sort, or a very well-respected man, plantation owner, all dressed in white. And my husband was this guy, and that I'd just met. And he was my husband in that past life. And he was going off to the American Civil War. And my dad was encouraging him, and I was pregnant. And I was not happy that he was going away to war, and he promised me that he would come back. So he made this soul level promise that he'd come back, and yet he died. And so it was like in this lifetime, his soul was keeping up that promise that he would come back. And when we connected, it was very powerful. But he also said, don't get attached, I'm not here for long. So it was a very powerful reconnection at a soul level. And it made me start looking into the soul level stuff. And so as the universe does, it gave me a back injury. I had spinal surgery. And I was moving house and all of this sort of stuff. There was a whole lot of stuff going on. And I ended up having a Reiki session with my Reiki master. And she gave me Reiki and said, what are you doing? And I said, I'm reading Many Lives, Many Masters again. Have you ever read that book by Brian Weiss?
Yes.
One of my most favourite books.
Yeah.
And I just said to her, I'd really love to do hypnotherapy one day. And she just made this comment, my sister's doing a hypnotherapy course at the moment.
Yeah.
I'll get the details. So next thing you know, synchronicities, because I wasn't going back to work full time, I was enrolled like the next weekend in this hypnotherapy course with my back injury, standing at the back of the class most of the time because I couldn't sit. And over those couple of years, I did this hypnotherapy, which is when I also got introduced to EFT. So it was all very synchronistic, the way it occurred. So then I started combining hypnotherapy with EFT. And at the same time, on my spiritual journey, I'd been led to the work and the teachings of Cryon. And Cryon kept teaching that it wasn't just good enough to go into past lives to heal past traumas, but that was something that was needed to be done, that our Akash, or our past lives, were stored in the multidimensional layers of our DNA, which is what scientists used to call junk DNA. And that we could not only go back into past lives and heal past traumas and unfinished business and things like that, but we could also go back and find the gold. And he termed that mining the Akash. So going back and finding the great experiences, the wisdom, the knowledge, and bring that back and activating them in the current life into your current DNA, your biological DNA. So I just started doing all of that. I trained in past life regression and hypnotherapy as well. And I started combining my EFT, looking at who are we as a soul, what at a soul level are we learning? Why did our soul choose to have our parents or to have these circumstances? What is the higher learning and lesson that we're supposed to be having from this? So I started connecting with our past lives and our death scenes and our trauma scenes, and then going up into the higher learning and lesson, and then getting what's the higher learning and lesson from that lifetime, and why have my guides and higher self taken me to that? What's the relevance of it for me now in this life? So it's been very powerfully affecting people's souls and people wanting to know, why am I here? Why is this happening to me? Why do I have this recurring pattern and belief? And where does it come from? And often, I wouldn't even say often, it's always come from past lives as well, because it's in this lifetime for a reason, for us to step through it. We haven't cleared it yet.
Can people do that on their own without the help? It just does it just take longer?
Yeah, it's a bit harder. It depends on how much you're used to, meditating or doing past life stuff, or being able to get there yourself. Sometimes people have very profound dreams that are of past lives, or have very strong intuition, or sometimes people have gone to clairvoyance or past life readers, and they've said, I see you in this scenario. And I always say to people, well, if that lands with you, if that really resonates with you emotionally and at a core level, then that's what we will work on. But if it's somebody just saying this and it doesn't land on you, it doesn't resonate with you, then maybe it's not. But we always work on what comes up for people and what people intuitively feel. Like in my workshops, for instance, I will say to people, do you have an affinity with a certain culture or a certain country or a certain food? And often they will go, yeah, I'm fascinated with medieval times, or I'm fascinated with, one lady in my book, she was fascinated with, she was Asian, Malaysian, and living in Australia, but she was fascinated with Old English, big band, the war years in England, that sort of stuff. And of course, as soon as we went into past life regression, that's where she went.
It's like I had this moment. I want to ask what it looks like to go into past life regression, like what that really means in terms of what the actions are, and so people can kind of wrap their head around it. But also hearing you say that probably 2 or 3 years after my first yoga teacher training, there was a teacher who came to Washington, and we hadn't really had a teacher like her in the area before, meaning she was Indian. She was actually Hare Krishna, and she brought a lot of chanting and food, and she hosted this night. And I took 2 of my friends. I said, come with me. This new teacher is hosting this kirtan, and I've never been, and I don't know what it's going to be like, but let's go. And Jenny, I walked in the room. Oh, I have the chills right now, even thinking about it. I walked in the room and I heard the harmonium live and the chanting. And all I felt was a vibration of being home.
Yes.
And it was the most familiar sound and environment, yet it was nothing like my sort of, I was crossing the line between sort of like modern external job, like, you know, kind of, I look like very stereotypical American life. And so this was this transition period where I started experiencing new things. But when I walked in that room, it was like I'd been there my whole life. I knew I knew it all. And my friends were kind of like looking at their watch, like, can we go to the bar now? You know, they were like, this is fun. Let's go. You know, they didn't have that same experience, and I didn't know what was happening. And now, just kind of putting all those pieces together, there's something related to.
Yes. Yeah. So you've had definitely past lives in India and that chanting, etc. So, you know, that would be something, if I was working with you, we would explore and go to that memory of this life and how that felt for you, and then ask guides and higher self to take you to other lifetimes. But always I ask our guides and higher self to take us to where we need to go for our highest learning and lesson in this life.
Yeah. I love that.
And we will often, so it's not me leading, I'm just the facilitator, going on the journey with you where your guides and higher self are taking you. And it's a privilege and an honor to be in that space with people where they're going into that amazing space of higher learning and lesson as well in between lives, or even as we're in another life. And as a lot of the spiritual teachers say, is that there is no past, it's all now. And when we're in that past life, so to speak, that other lifetime, when we're in the now, we can actually change it in the now. And sometimes we've done that as well, so that we've gone from a very traumatic place into higher learning and lesson, rising above it into spirit and getting all the higher learning and lesson at a soul level. And then we've taken it back down into that traumatic time and place in that lifetime, and we change it in the now. We apply it. And then we see how the lifetime changes and shifts, and it changes and shifts in the now as we're there living it.
So many questions. Okay, so I want to know, do you think everybody has access to this gift?
I think so. However, some people, it takes a bit longer to get there. It depends on how much of their left brain and analytical mind gets in the way. But mostly people who come to me have read my books. You know, Tapping into Past Lives was the first book, and then Your Past Life Inheritance. And when they've read the books and they've seen and they've resonated with something, and they're curious and they have a reason for wanting to do the work for themselves, they're normally at a place where they're ready to do that because they're on that path. Yeah.
And they come to you because it's this sort of series of like, yes. Okay. So can we talk about your real life, everyday life? How did your children respond to this? Because this happened while you were raising them, right? You didn't always have this gift that you were using. So how did your friends and family respond to you? Were you working before you did this? And tell me a little about that transition.
Yeah, well, I was an occupational therapist, and while I was doing that, and I started to slow down my OT work and slowly increase my EFT and hypnotherapy work, but more and more it became EFT work. I'd had my own business as an OT working with veterans, and when I first saw EFT and the profound effect it had on veterans with PTSD, I started working with veterans because I was already working with veterans with my OT work. So that's sort of how I got into the clinical EFT area. Was I was talking to Dawson Church by email through the work and the research that he was doing with veterans and PTSD with EFT. And I interviewed him a couple of times. I let him know that I was emailing the Australian government and all that sort of thing about EFT for veterans and PTSD. And out of nowhere, Dawson decided, because this is when Gary Craig retired, to create EFT Universe clinical EFT training. And he invited trainers to the trainers training in Santa Rosa, California. And I was the only one invited from the Southern Hemisphere. So I felt that was a real honour. And that's when I became an EFT Universe clinical EFT trainer in 2010. And it was being able to run and train people. You know, I'm an introvert by nature. However, running small groups and trainings, I felt was my purpose and where I belonged. And it gave me the confidence to then step into the spiritual side and create quantum EFT for the soul, and write the books. And I actually had lots of synchronistic events happen with Lee Carroll, who channels Cryon, where I was able to spend lots of one-on-one time with him, and I explained how the teachings of Cryon said, you know, to do this work, but he didn't say how. And I said, I can see that using the meridian points and tapping is a perfect way to then tap in the good stuff, you know, connect it with our biological DNA from the multidimensional through the meridians and through the magnetics of the meridian system. And he said, perfect, go for it. You're the one to do it. You've done past life regression and tapping and teaching and write the books, do the workshops. So that's what happened. Little push from spirit.
Was anyone in your personal life resistant or eye rolling, or like anyone like, what's happening out there?
Yeah. So like, I didn't even answer your question about family, did I? I got sidetracked. So my kids
That's okay. It's so interesting, and I love all of it, but it's so rich, and you've done so much. I want to hear about that.
Yeah, so people would eye roll. Some of my family, you know, I've got some people in the family who are born again Christians, so to speak, and so they're not.
The irony. I'm sure you could talk to them a lot about past lives with the born again Christian.
Yeah. However, you know, I don't know that my family have all read my book. Some of them have. I don't even know if my daughter has. I think my eldest son has, but I don't know if my youngest son has. But it's basically you just get on with your purpose, and people either agree with it or they don't. It's their own soul journey. And even people in the clinical EFT world, you know, Dawson is a very spiritual person, and he's done quantum EFT and past life regression with me and had an amazing session and done a testimonial on it. But at the same time, he's trying to get clinical EFT into the American Psychological Association. So he says, I can't really be seen at that level to be connecting with past life stuff. You know, there's people in Australia who you know, Dr. Peter Stapleton, she's amazing with the research she's doing with tapping and EFT and the science. And I know that she's very much believes in the spiritual side of it and the past life side too, but she's not openly seen to be connecting with that as well. So there's still a lot of what I call people in the cupboard spiritually that haven't come out. They believe it privately, but they don't publicly stand for what they believe. You know, even the World Tapping Summit's on at the moment. And when I spoke to Jess, because other people that had been guests on the World Tapping Summit said, you should contact them, you should, you know, be in there doing the spiritual side and the past life side. And when Jess got back to me a couple of years back, she said, you know, I believe in all of this myself personally, but I don't think we're ready to go out there publicly with it. And I said, fair enough, when you're ready, you know where I am. So, you know, there's a lot of resistance still out there in the world where people aren't ready to openly embrace their spiritual side and what's going on. because there's still a lot of fear around it.
Yeah. Why do you think? What are we so afraid of?
Well, Cryon talks about that, and it's in our Akash. It's part of our past lives when we were into what people would call the woo-woo, or they were afraid, the witch hunts, the stuff that people were afraid of in other lifetimes, and you were persecuted and killed for that. Then a big part of your DNA is screaming out, don't do that again, that's dangerous. Don't go there out, don't show yourself publicly to be doing that. It's okay to be doing that in secret, but if you get found out, if you get publicly recognized for that, your head could be on the chopping block. So that's part of our DNA and our Akash. It's part of our spiritual awakening. It took Dr. Brian Weiss a long time to step out of what will my colleagues think. As a
and just that fear, I've heard that before from people that I've worked with when I've asked about fear and what happens, kind of like this claiming power or playing big is often like what people, how we talk about it too. And we had this long discussion that depending on your lives, you may have done that a lot of times. So it's even more deeply ingrained, the fear, and yet you're still open to it. It keeps happening in terms of being open to recognizing and being open to possibility because it's so connected. So I love it. Like
there's a really good Cryon parable that's on the Cryon website, which is kryon.com. And then you go to free audio and then the parables. And there's a really great parable called Past Lives, Present Fears. And one of the past lives that Cryon describes is and he says many of us old souls have lifetimes as monks and nuns where we've served. But we've been in servitude. We've been the sheep, not the shepherd. And it's been ingrained into us that we are not the leader. We are not the shepherd. We have to bow in servitude. And so there's many old souls who have that spirituality and that draw to spirituality. However, they don't want to be the leader in their field. So they keep themselves very small. And that's probably one of my biggest passions, is to get these people who have these amazing gifts and amazing healing abilities, but they keep themselves very small because of these fears. And I want these people to get their gifts out to the world so that others can have access to that. So that's my main aim, is to have these people step out of the spiritual closet and be happy and free and confident to put themselves out there. We haven't really said specifically what EFT is, how it works, and who. That's actually how I met you, was calling you about my daughter, and then having my husband call you about doing some specific EFT. So can you talk a little bit about EFT and what it is and who it's good for, where it came from? So clinical EFT is a term that Dawson has used because in all the clinical research, it's EFT has to be used the same way. And it came from thought field therapy originally, and Roger Callahan, where he noticed that tapping on meridian points would shift phobias. Especially he tried it with a lady who had a severe water phobia, and he'd tried hypnosis, he'd tried everything. And she said that she felt sick to the stomach every time she went near water or thought about water. So he had her tap on the under the eye point, which is the end point of the stomach meridian, and her fear disappeared. And he thought, wow, there's something to this. And so he started creating different algorithms, different sort of recipes of which points to tap in which order for different emotions. And then Gary Craig came along and just put all of those algorithms together, basically just tapping all the points together for memories. Because in memory, when you think of a specific memory, all those parts of the brain, what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, are are activated into that memory, and then the brain has a conditioned response. Now, if that conditioned response is one of fight or flight, which the amygdala, the hippocampus, sends messages to the adrenal glands, and you have cortisol, adrenaline pumping through your system, your heart's going crazy, you're sweating, you're in fight or flight. And what we've noticed with tapping is that just like acupuncture, tapping on the meridian points instead of putting needles in sends a pulse through the meridians and clears the blockages of energy and tells that part of the brain to stand down, like calm down, stand down, you're okay, you're safe, relax. And it switches off that sympathetic nervous system response, switches off the adrenaline and cortisol, and it switches on the parasympathetic response, which then allows DHEA, which is the cell repair hormone, to flood into the body. So most people want to be in a state of health rather than a state of dis-ease. And of course, if you're in a state of fight or flight a lot of the time, stress response, then you're in a state of dis-ease and you don't have the cell repair hormone floating around in your body. So the body isn't able to heal itself or repair itself. And so when you're in a state of dis-ease, you then welcoming, and have the perfect culture for disease. So who wouldn't want to be in a state of relaxation and be in a state of, my body can heal itself now?
I noticed that when you did the technique with Sailor, and I've seen this with other people, is that there's the affirmations that you sort of say. And I would think that if you said aloud what you're afraid of, that it would bring more of what you're afraid of. So why do we say what we're afraid of? Like, even though you know the script, obviously, better than I do.
Even though I've got this fear of spiders and it makes my skin crawl or whatever. People are often saying, but that's a negative belief. I don't want to put a negative affirmation out there to the universe. However, it's not a negative affirmation. It's just stating what's there. So in stating what's there, as well as tapping, when we're focusing on what we don't want or what is already there, that state of stress, then, and tapping at the same time, we're actually processing it. So we're tuning into that negative conditioned stress response. And as we're tuning into it and tapping, we're telling that part of the brain, relax, you're okay. When you remember seeing what you saw, when you remember hearing what you heard, when you remember feeling what you felt, it's okay, you're safe, relax. And it counter conditions that conditioned stress response to a relaxation response. So that then when people tune into that memory again, they don't have the fight or flight response. They have a counter conditioned response, which is that of relaxation.
So to me, it's almost like there's this acceptance or awareness of what's really happening, and that's why it makes a difference. And I remember when you worked with my husband on needles, that I went in the morning of and said, and I was tapping over him and said, even though I'm afraid of the needles, and he was like, no, don't say that. He was like, stop, I don't want to hear it. And I was laughing. I was like, no, that's what we do. Like, you have to acknowledge, you can't bypass it. Like, this is part of it. And just like thinking positively doesn't always work if your actual body is sending a different message. And I think that just kind of putting the pieces together, that's why something like law of attraction and just positive thinking doesn't work for everybody, because there's these signals inside of the body that are sending something totally mixed. So we're working with both, all of that.
Yeah, you can say positive affirmations till the cows come home, but if your energy and your subconscious is completely focused on something else, or it's pushing down something else, then the true affirmation is what's being pushed down, or what's really carrying the energetic charge. And we call that tail enders. So, you can say a positive affirmation that, what's one that we work on sometimes? Money flows to me easily. Yeah. Right. But the tail ender might be, but it goes out just as fast. It's it's that yeah, but, or it, and it's, and that is, it's that tail ender, that subconscious, the part, the energy charged part, that is really the affirmation.
Right.
So you need to actually work on that. So where did you learn that? Where did that come from, that belief? How did you get that energetic charge? Where does it come from? And then able to go back to the actual memory and event where that negative belief and negative charge was set up, and then counter conditioning it, taking the charge out of it. That's when whole belief systems get changed. Whole conditioned responses at a subconscious level get changed. At an automatic level.
Like RTT. Do you do RTT or no? The rapid transformational therapy. It's hypnotherapy, right?
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of hypnotherapy involved with EFT because the subconscious brain is brought into the picture when we're tapping. All the research shows that the brain waves go into the subconscious range. So I will often call EFT waking hypnosis.
Yeah. Well, I've been learning and studying and teaching little bits of this intro, especially because I do find that with the mainstream, so things are rising in terms of mainstream awareness with yoga and meditation, right?
And tapping.
and tapping, right? Lots and lots of wonderful holistic ways of healing and working with our bodies and ourselves. At the same time, that stress and distraction and overwhelm and I live in Washington, so in political situation is heightening. And it's kind of like they're both going super fast. And so the reason I say that is I have women in our community who've been doing yoga for 20 years and are super anxious and are reliving same pattern. And so now that I've been in the field for so long and I can see these habits and patterns, and I study Ayurveda, and Ayurveda has a very similar approach to all of this in terms of what the wisdom says. It pulls all, it's all saying the same thing. So I have been learning how to work with the minds and the body and nature and all of that very slowly over the past 20 years. And that's done a wonderful job. But I, in honor of my students in our community, was like, I've got to find some resources for them, because these yoga classes are no longer relaxing and restorative. They're power, they're hot, they're sweaty, they're fitness. And they're not having the same impact on our environment and our students. And so now putting together these pieces where, we'll record this and we'll put this on the podcast, and then someone will come to me over the next, 6 to 12 months and say, I don't know what else to do, and I'll say, go listen to this episode, because we talk about a lot of different ways to get into that subconscious. So I guess what I want to know is who is a good candidate for an EFT, and who is a good candidate for the past life regression? What do you see it be, who do you see it being good for, and how does it show up in their life?
Well, often what I do is we look at EFT first for anyone who's having any awareness that there's a repeat or a sabotaging behavior or an anxiety or a stress going on in their life. So anyone who's feeling stressed, feeling anxious, feeling helpless, feeling powerless, feeling like there's no joy and spark and enthusiasm and passion in life, then EFT's for them. But what I do with all of my clients is I always use the wording, whether they have a spiritual, a conscious spiritual acknowledgement or not, is that we release it all the way back to its origin in this life and all lives. So I will put that wording in, and people, whether they believe it or not, they're still speaking it out loud to their cells and to their DNA, that I want this released once and for all the way back to its origin in this life and every life, every time I've ever experienced this pattern of behavior, this feeling, this belief, whatever it is. And often when we're doing that, even people who don't consciously believe in past lives, like there's a really great story in my first book, Tapping into Past Lives. It will clear for them. There's this guy who was doing my clinical EFT workshop. and he had this abandonment issue. And he said, I've worked on it all the way back to birth, through every time I've ever felt abandoned. And synchronistically, he was sitting in a workshop. You know, we had a U-shaped chairs, right, chairs and tables. And he was sitting opposite a woman he'd just been going out with, and she'd recently dumped him. So abandonment. And he was staring her in the face for the whole 4 days, right? So talk about the universe really bringing forth what needs to be worked on. So on the last day, I said to him, are you willing to work to this all the way back to its origin? He said, I've worked back to birth, back to conception, in utero, all the rest. And I said, are you willing to go to its origin, to release it? And he knew I was getting to past lives. He said, but I don't believe in past lives. I'm not a past life kind of guy. Well, his words, right? But as we got tapping into it, and we were affirming that we're releasing it all the way back to its origin, he just started crying with all of this emotion coming up. And he said, I'm an Aboriginal, and the bone's being pointed at me. And at the same time, his consciousness would say, but I'm not a past life kind of guy, but I'm an Aboriginal, and the bone's being pointed at me. So, you know, the bone being pointed at an Aboriginal is you're abandoned by your whole community. You're sent out into the bush to die. That's abandonment at its highest level. And that's what had occurred for him. And we cleared it. And even though we were tapping, and, you know, part of his consciousness is still saying, but I don't believe this, but his emotions and his energy, he was crying with the emotion of it all, and it just popped in, because he had the intention to clear it all the way back to its origin. And this is quite typical of people who don't see or feel past lives. You know, I had a lady recently who did a workshop, and part of the Quantum EFT workshop is connecting with guides and higher self. And we do a psychometry exercise where you hold on to something of another person's and tune into guides and higher self and so to speak read it. And she was getting nothing. Practice after practice, just nothing. It was just a blockage. And so we started tapping on that. We did quantum EFT for it. And all of a sudden, all this emotion, you know, trying to find out where this blockage comes from, this fear of tuning in and getting connected with guides, higher self, spirituality. It went to a past life where she was gagged and tortured for speaking her truth and her spirituality, and we released it all. And later on in the workshop we did psychometry again, and all this stuff just started coming in for her. It was just easy. She said, I can see it, this is amazing, where did this all come from? And so sometimes we need to release the blockages to then allow all of this stuff to come through, but it is available to everyone.
And I would say if someone feels like this is like what I love about Buddhism is if they say, well, I don't believe it and I don't know, then it's like, just try it and see how it feels for yourself. That's all Buddha says. It's like, don't take my word for it. Like, see how it feels and see what happens. I think I wrote down some more questions. And then I want to respect your time since it's the middle of your workday and I'm going to bed because you're in Australia. What does your do you have daily rituals or practices or your own teachers that you work with to keep yourself clear or open or healthy to be able to do this work?
Yeah, mostly it's my intention and the way I speak to my guides and my higher self, and sort of the soul. What's the soul learning and lesson in this? Why am I triggered by this? Where does this come from? So it's an intention that I live with. So I don't so much sit and meditate. Cryon talks about it as being able to be in a state of connection with higher self and a state of meditation and calmness that people notice. You know, I had a friend staying here like last night from New Zealand, and I live an hour to an hour and a half away from the airport. So I took her last night to an Airbnb right near the airport because she had to get up very early. And then on the way home, she's ringing me, oh my God, I've left my passport at your place. Come back and get me. What am I going to do? And I was just calm and at ease and no panic. And it's like, that's all right. We'll work it out. Come back to my place. We'll get up early. You'll get there. It's all fine. And, you know, when dramas and traumas and things are going on around me, I don't get connected to the drama and the trauma of it.
Did you used to?
Yes.
Yeah. So you notice a shift in how you respond.
Yeah. And so people notice that about me when there's dramas going on. And it's more of a state that I'm able to be in because, you know, I've traveled through many hundreds of people's lives and past lives where they've had traumas and dramas and deaths and the higher learning, and then they come back and it's like, don't sweat the stuff because it's all small in a state of a soul. It's like, what's the soul learning here?
I remember the question I wanted to ask you was, when you said we cleared it, what does that mean for people who are wondering?
So clearing it at an energetically level, at a spiritual level, at a soul level, at a conscious level, at a subconscious level, at an energetic level. So that's what I love about quantum EFT for the soul, is that we're not just clearing things consciously and subconsciously and energetically. We're clearing things at a soul level, as well as all of those other levels, physically, energetically, consciously, emotionally, subconsciously.
Is that by going back to the memories? Is that by naming it? Is that by just going back through the experience of it? Is that when you're talking about clearing, is that what you mean? Yeah,
shifting the whole reaction of the experience. So that the reaction isn't one of fight or flight. The reaction isn't one of a negative belief. The reaction is one of a higher learning and understanding, and the reaction is one of relaxation, of at ease, of understanding. There's not only a cognitive shift, but there's an energetic shift and a spiritual understanding shift.
Yeah. I just want to make sure, because everybody thinks differently, and there's clearing in some of the more controversial.
It doesn't mean that you haven't cleared the memory, but the memory might be there, but there's no emotional attachment to it, and there's a higher learning and understanding to it.
And it's not rippling out and affecting your life and your day-to-day habit. I have had some clearing with some RTT, subconscious therapy, again, experimenting for my clients, like, what is this for? Is this helpful? And got back to some memories that I didn't know at the conscious level, and that were profoundly impacting how I was showing up in my life because it had been programmed so early. So I cleared it by going there and spending time there, and I'm not afraid of it. And now I also know about it. So, and know, like in quotes, because I don't know, but I know, like I'm embodied by
energetically.
Energetically know that happened.
Knowing,
Is there anybody that you feel like these practices that you specifically teach and work with are not good for? Is there anybody who's not a good fit?
If somebody's, spaced out on drugs or really, really psychotic and in an active phase of that psychosis, then I wouldn't work with them. However, I have worked with people who have had psychotic episodes, who are on antidepressants, who are on anti-anxieties. I tend to look at the person and their experience rather than their label. When people say, have you ever worked with a schizophrenic before? I go, I don't know. I work with people, not labels. Like, let me talk to them. Let me see what's their experience, what's going on for them.
Okay, last question. What do you think, can you talk a little about how you see trauma or tragedy that happens in this life, in terms of, is this, in your experience with working with so many people, are things repeating throughout lives? And we also, you also said in the beginning that it took your own sort of trauma in order to really wake up and make the shifts in your own life. So can you talk a little bit about how this happens in our life? Because I think there's this whole sort of why me that happens when...
Yeah, well, when we look at it at a soul level, and part of the quantum EFT workshops that I do is we look at our soul agreements with other people around us. And these soul agreements are always in place because there's something to be learned or something to be completed. There's unfinished business. So everything that I have found that is occurring that is of a negative nature, I guess, in this life is because it relates back. It's occurred in other lifetimes, and it's recurred again because it hasn't been completed. It hasn't been finished. It hasn't been stepped through. It hasn't been... it hasn't had a positive outcome. So we need to turn it around and find out why do I react this way? Why did I have parents like that? Why do I have abusive relationships? Why do I, all of these things, where do they come from? And often we find that we reincarnate in groups, in family groups in particular, and that we've had lots of past lives with other people. People will come into my workshops and say, oh, I've got this love-hate relationship with this person, or this person's always there doing this or that. And then you go back and find that they were souls in another lifetime, and you find the reason for all of why this is occurring, and you're able to disconnect that reason. And then when stuff is shifted in other lifetimes, it naturally shifts for that person in this lifetime as well. There's a really great story in the book where there was a lady, I said the lady that went back to England. She came to me because she had a problem with her 13-year-old daughter. She said, she hates me, she doesn't talk to me, all of this. And when we went back to that past life, her mother, it was in the war years, and her mother, she was very connected with her mother. Her mother was dying and was injured, and at the same time she was pregnant, and the soul that she was pregnant with was her daughter in this life. And what we found was that she was just in grief and sadness and connection with mother, and she wasn't giving any love or attention to the baby. And so we cleared all of that. We saw how she has many lifetimes with her mother, and then we started sending love to that baby and that soul in that lifetime. Well, when she got home, her daughter was completely different to her. There was love, there was connection, and we shifted it all from that lifetime.
And then do you think after we do this work, what happens? Then is your client who went through all of that, is she free? What does that mean? Like, if we do all of this work in this lifetime, and I know I spend a lot of time thinking about this and doing this present work with every relationship, with every tension, what's the bigger learning? What am I learning from this? But then what?
Well, it's about being here and living in joy and knowing that you're a being of light with full free choice, with magnificence, and being able to be so much more connected with your higher self, the part of you that is your soul, your divinity. It's about having heaven on earth, I guess, being able to be that divine human that isn't worried about stuff, that isn't stressed about stuff, that is grateful and joyful in everything that we're able to experience here as a human being.
Even the domestic stuff. One of my healers, we were talking about it. I said, there seems to be this at odds with like being a mom and running my business, and yet like I just want to take my book and head to the hills. And she's like, oh yeah, you were probably a monk or a nun, so that's really comfortable for you, and you were probably a householder, and that's comfortable for you, and in either life you weren't really happy, so this life is really pushing you to try to embrace it all.
And so what I would do with someone like that is we would look at what's grading you the wrong way, where's that
the
conflict
mind.
coming
It's
from?
me.
Yeah, but it's also going back to
Right.
where does this come from?
Right.
Um,
Right.
and finding that. I had a lady in my last clinical EFT workshop, and she's been trying to get pregnant, and we touched on something in clinical EFT, and she said, oh, this is coming from past life, I know it. And so I did a quantum EFT session with her, and yeah, she's very connected with her mum and her sister in this lifetime, and it went back to Germany and the gas chambers, and her mum and her sister were her children in that lifetime, and she lost them. And so there was this fear of and this heartache, this immense heartache of losing children, that it was too hard to have children because the pain of loss was so huge. And there was other things, lots of childbirth deaths in childbirth, and so there was a whole lot of stuff. So we cleared all of that energy on all those lifetimes where there was loss around babies and children. And then I said, now connect with all the lifetimes where you had positive lifetimes as a mother, and the joy and the love as a mother. And she said, oh, I can see them all lining up.
Yeah.
And so once we completed that, I said, can you see that with that energy of loss that you had, how there's no way that your body would have allowed you to get pregnant again in this lifetime? With all that promise, basically at a soul level, that hurt and pain, I'm never going to do that again.
Yeah, of course.
And so we cleared it.
Yeah. I think the thing that I really appreciate, I just want to say in closing, that I really appreciate how you take that the mission of the work is not to do it and let it sit, but is to do it and then find the mind for the good and the gold and look for the aspects that we can actually bring to this realm, in this world, to our actual humans and our people, and to be with them to elevate this experience, because that take is a little different than I've heard before, where it's kind of like your Akashic records, learn them, and then it's kind of period. And I always think, well, then what? Like, it's great to know stuff, but what's the purpose of it? And how, why are we doing that? And I love this mission that you have to really clear it so that we can pull the more positive aspects or the more heartful aspects. And I'm also curious because, of course, if the brain has this negativity bias, so fascinating that, of course, we even, again, we're kind of blending science and spirit, is that the brain is going to focus on all of these negative experiences that we've had and not look for the good, and, not look for the gold, the parts where we were beautiful healers and mothers, and that we lived in this joy state. So I love just how you approach it. And I think I really hope that people who are listening reach out and learn more from you and take some classes. In fact, I had some ideas. I'm going to invite you to do some other guest teaching and that kind of thing for some of our other classes. So I'll talk to you about that. And hopefully one day you'll come to Washington and we'll be in person.
I did do a class. I did do a class once in Washington at my publisher's place, Angela.
At Angela's, at the castle?
Yeah. Oh, it was before the castle. But yes, I do run an online version of the workshop.
Okay.
I haven't got one planned for the second half of the year yet, but I will.
But what's all your links? Where can people find all of your work and your writing?
quantumeft.com.au, because the AU is for Australia. I do a personal one-on-one. I work with most people by Skype or Zoom. And you can do personal past life regression and quantum EFT transform your life program with me. You can do package of quantum EFT sessions, packages of any session that you want with me, or just a 2-hour past life regression session, and workshops in Melbourne. And I'm actually doing a workshop in the Philippines this year too. I've been invited to be a guest speaker there for a conference of guidance counsellors. And I also teach clinical EFT in Melbourne as well. And so the clinical EFT stuff is on my Jenny Johnston, ston.com.au website. And I have clinical EFT workshops there and clinical EFT sessions, and you can book free 15-minute chat appointments or a 30-minute Transform Your Life program interview from my website. On any of the pages on my website, you can click to Let's Talk, Schedule Now, and book a time with me.
Do you, and you work with any ages? This is the other reason I wanted to have you on and share, is because we did Sailor's when she was 9. So what are the ages that you work with for parents?
Any age. When I worked with Angela's son, I think he was only 8. Yeah. And, we went to past life stuff there. We even went to future life. He went to a future life. It was pretty awesome. So, any child that's open to it, right through to, I've worked with people in their 80s that are doing past life stuff. And, one of the things that I look at is that people can't look at their soul stuff, their higher learning stuff, and if they're in fight or flight, if they're in stress, if they're in survival mode. So the first thing that needs to be done is to get them out of survival mode, out of that stress automatic reaction of fight or flight. I'm not safe. I'm overwhelmed. I'm powerless. All of that sort of stuff. Once all of that human negative reaction is gone, we're able to then look at, well, why am I really here? Who am I really? Who am I as a soul?
Yeah, I think I didn't know about that future life stuff. That's fascinating. I don't.
I've had a few people go into that, and parallel lives. It's very interesting. Yeah.
Oh, that's super cool. I'm going to have to look into that and talk more about that. Jenny, thank you for everything that you do in the world. Thank you for showing up and playing your version of big, which is really helping a lot of us. And really staying on the path. I think it's so incredibly important right now, and grateful for knowing you and having you in our life and in our family's life. So thank you so much. And I hope to hear more, have you on more, and share what you're doing. Okay.
Thank you so much. And I forgot to say that both those books, Tapping into Past Lives and Your Past Life Inheritance, are available on Kindle and Amazon. So
great. So your website and Amazon. Okay, great. Yes. So for people in the States. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jenny. I'll put links to everything in the show notes, so they'll be able to just link. Okay. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.